There we go. All right, there we go. Now we're looking at it. Okay, so this is the actual Greater Louisville Association of Realtors contract. It basically is a mirror image of the state contract. Of course, we have all of these, whether you use DocuSign or whatever e-signature. I know some of you use Dotloop still and things like that. But one of the main things that I wanted to kind of go through in this one is talk through some key points inside of this, how to fill it out. I've done this class, so I'm not going to go into great detail on like each individual line, what you put on there, because we've done that before. So you can always go to our YouTube page and kind of reference that to see. But I wanted to talk through a couple of key points inside of here and some things to note. First and foremost is doesn't matter which purchase agreement you use, every single line needs to be filled out. Now, if you don't have some information, if I scroll down and you don't know the lot number or maybe the deed book or the page number, which FYI, you can pull that off the PVA, but if you don't, you still put in dashes here. So we don't leave anything blank because what we don't want to happen, not saying anybody would ever do this, but we don't want somebody to come in behind us and fill out something that's blank. That's considered an above the line change, which means it isn't part of the original agreement that everybody signed for. So some of you probably know this, but if you do need to change something, let's say that you accidentally put in, we'll come down here to purchase price or earnest money deposit, and you accidentally put in $1,000 and it was supposed to be $10,000 on an agreement that has already been signed. You can actually cross through it and put in a new number as long as both parties and yourself initial date and time next to the side of it. Now, this is only talking an executed contract, meaning we filled this out, buyer and seller have signed it, and we need to make some sort of change. Now, I don't like doing that, and I'm going to recommend none of you do that. I just want you to know that is a legal option that you can do it. I think it's better off that, especially if it has something to do with financials and the purchase price, I think it's better off for you to actually go in and either write a new contract and have everybody sign it, or do an addendum that clearly states what the change is. And that way there's no chance that one party comes back and says, oh, that was an above the line change that we didn't agree to on the original agreement. Because remember, it takes us 30 to 60 days to close, depending on the deal, sometimes even longer. People might not remember what they originally agreed to. So just keep that in mind. You fill everything out when you're putting your numbers in. So especially like with the purchase price or earnest money or any of the down payments or financing portions, always put in the cents as well. So if somebody's paying 250,000 in this line, I would write in 250,000 and then .00 to include the cents. The reason that we want to do this, again, it's all about liability. It's all about protecting you as the agent and protecting your client. Is on the purchase price, if somebody wrote in 250,000 and an extra zero accidentally gets added in, well, now they're buying a house for 2.5 million, right? Now, obviously, that would be corrected prior to closing, but it does create loops and it does create potential distrust between you and the client. So we always put the cents in. The other thing to always do, I highly recommend this, especially on the purchase price and key numbers, is to write out next to it the amount. So again, if we're using the 250, I'm going to put 250,000 right here. And then in parentheses, I'm going to spell out, I should say, the words 250,000. That's why, if you go back to like writing checks, right? If we go and we learn how to write a check, then we know that on the checks we have to go in and like on the bottom line write in, here's how much we're actually paying for the house, or excuse me, for that check. So we write the number amount in the small box, but we write out the amount. The reason being is banks will, if there's ever a discrepancy or they can't read a number or something like that, they always resort to what was written out. So just a couple things before we get started on this, but let's go ahead. Those are the two main things I wanted to cover, but let's go through and dive through how do you fill it out? Well, the top portion, this top section is all about who is the listing agent. So if you're going to be representing the buyer, most likely if you're filling this out. So this will be who is the listing agent. You'll include obviously the company name, their name, all of their contact information. If you don't have something like, so for example, if there's not a name, you can either put a NA or put dashes in through this. Same thing with phone number and things like that. The selling company in this case is going to be who represents the buyer. So you'll fill that portion of the contract out. And then for MLS reporting, if it's a team or a name other than above, you can put that in. So for example, you're on the Harris Group, 270 Homes Group, Empire Property Group, any of those things. That's what this line is for, which will help you get credit in the MLS. Because if you notice, a lot of times, especially if you have a team or you're an agent on a team, you might sell something and it goes in your individual name instead of the team name, and then vice versa. So just wanted to note that they do have this on the contract as well. In terms of the property, this is what the address is. So always include the full address. That is the street number, the street name, the city, the state, and the zip code needs to be included on line number 24. And then, as I mentioned earlier, on line 25, you can pull from the PVA to receive the deed book, the page number, the block number, if there is one, and the lot number. And if you don't know those, to just kind of dash through those as well. Remember, we're not going to leave any blanks on here. Sublot, and then county number as well. And then it goes on. It says that all parties are going to leave all the improvements and fixtures, which are acknowledged by all parties not to be personal property, including but not limited to. And it kind of lists this out. So this isn't something like you circle for them to list. This is more of just a explanation of this stuff is automatically included and doesn't need to be listed under personal property. Where we're going to list personal property is down below here, where we check off what appliances are staying. So they have some predetermined appliances in here and the following. So if it's not one of the appliances here or listed in this box, then you need to have it on this section to outline this. A lot of times I'll see stuff like garage door openers. I see agents put garage door openers on here a lot. On this particular state contract, they actually mention remote control devices, so you might not have to put that. Now, I'm not saying don't put it, because it's always better to have clarity, but just so you know, that's kind of covered up here as well. And then what is the seller allowed to remove? Now, keep in mind, a fixture is something that is removed and leaves the property in incomplete or potentially damaged condition. So, if they are taking out a chandelier, if they're removing surround sound, anything along those lines, we're going to want to mention this here, especially, and this is something that comes up a lot, a TV, totally allowed to take, considered personal property. A TV mount, you need permission to take, because if you remove that mount from the wall, now you have holes in the wall, you might potentially have to paint, things along those lines. So just so you know, like, you'll want to cover that with your buyers, but then also for listings, you want to make sure that your sellers know about that as well. Another reason I really like the state contract here is they have something for fuel and propane tanks. So a lot of people don't recognize this, but if somebody has a large propane tank, you see them on the side of houses, especially out in the county, they don't always own them. A lot of times those are leased from the company that actually comes out and fills the propane tank. And this clearly defines, is it owned or is it leased? Does it stay or does it not stay? So I've had some personal deals in my tenure as a real estate agent where I didn't know that it was leased, and we would go and close on the property and then show up and there's no tank there anymore. And we always thought the tank was staying. So that's just a lesson that I've learned that I wanted to pass along. So if there is a propane or any type of fuel tank, always ask the other agent, is it owned, is it leased, is it staying, is it not staying? And then put that in here. If there is no propane tank, then you would just check the not applicable here. Next is purchase price. You all know this. We're going to put the purchase price in here. It's always best to spell it out. Like I said earlier, your earnest money deposit amount is going to go here. And then how are they paying for the home? And that's going to be really lines all the way down from 44 all the way down till 64. So what type of loan are they getting? Or excuse me, I skipped some. How much cash are they paying cash, and what is the amount here? So they can do a down payment or all cash, and then you can do either dollar amounts or percentage on this contract. So you can say I'm putting down 10,000 or I'm putting down 10%. Are they using an equity line, getting a gift from somebody else, or other? An example of other might be they're pulling from a retirement account. So that none of that counts as cash. So if they have a equity line, if they they have a retirement account, the 401k that they're pulling money from, even though it's cash once they get it, there are things that have to happen in order for that to happen, if that makes sense. So you have to apply to get your 401k out, right? You have to apply for your equity line. If your mom or somebody in family or friends giving you a gift of $50,000, there's certain things that have to happen in order for that. Cash means it's money in the bank. You're ready to cash it out right away. If there's any steps involved with it where it comes from something other than your bank account, that's what this line 46 is. And it's either equity line, gift, or you can check other and then what's happening there. Another reason I like this one, you all know, especially with our rural areas, that USDA, KHC loans, which KHC isn't strictly rural, of course, but a lot of those offer down payment assistance. If there is down payment assistance, that does not go under the cash either. That has its own separate line here on line 47 where you can write out what that is. And then the whatever's left after we get through all of the cash or other methods that look like cash, then it's what financing is going to happen from here. So we're going to pick the loan type. Are we doing conventional, FHA, VA, fixed rate, adjustable rate, or other? Keep in mind, if it's a VA loan, in particular, the seller must pay for the pest inspection. So just something to note, the seller does not have to pay for the home inspection, but they do have to pay for the pest inspection. And that's regardless of state. So that's just a national rule. So you check, are they getting one of these loans or some other type of loan? You can put that here. And if there is another, you can attach an addendum explaining kind of the details of that loan. One example of that is maybe they're buying it on contract or something along those lines. How long is the loan going to be amortized for? So what's the length of the loan? And this is key, I see agents kind of mess this up a little bit from time to time, is with the interest rate not to exceed blank percent per annum, which basically means per year. So the interest rate not to exceed blank. It's not what today's rate is. It is what is the maximum amount that the buyer is comfortable moving forward with this loan if interest rates go up. This is actually a protection thing that is built in to protect the buyer, where if interest rates were to all of a sudden go from 7 to 12%, they might not be able to afford this home anymore. So I usually will talk to the buyer and say, hey, interest rates are currently sitting at X, let's just say 7%. For example, are you comfortable still moving forward with this loan if for some reason you had to get it at 8%? And if they say yes to that, then I'm putting 8 in here. So this is more of an out for them if interest rates get crazy over the course of the life of the loan. For an adjustable rate loan, adjustments are limited to the following, like what's the maximum amount that they're willing to go out. Again, this is all about protecting your buyer and making sure that they can afford the home. So you outline those things. At the top of every page, you're always going to put the address. This will autofill for you if you use DocuSign, where it automatically puts the address in for you. But this next paragraph is all about what happens with the loan. How many days do you have to actually apply for it? These are, unless you write in business, these are strict days, means Saturday and Sunday does count. What happens if you fail to get the loan and or to apply for the loan goes on in here, which basically says failure to apply for the loan is considered a breach of a contract, in which case one of the 3 things happens. Either the seller can grant an extension to go get the loan, the seller can void and retain the earnest money as liquid damages, or C, they can do a claim for damages as a result of a breach of contract. And we're going to talk about that at the end. Any changes in financing terms or lender must not adversely affect the seller's proceeds or the closing date. The seller shall be informed of the progress of the loan, including any change to the financing terms or selected lender. And then it has a place for lender contact information. I think this is really important. And I'm talking fast just so I can get through this all in 30 minutes. But if anything changes in the loan, whether you change loan type, you change lenders, really, if you even change the amount of down payment, then the seller has the right to know, and you have to disclose that. So you do that through an addendum or something like that. But just keep in mind, if anything changes in any type of loan type, this is regardless of what contract you use, by the way, then the seller has the right to know exactly what the buyer is doing from a financing standpoint. And the reason that this is important is because changes in lenders could cause delays. And if we need to let the seller know that up front and be honest with them about it. So this is the section that you would do that. Next little section is, except for earnest money deposit, all monies necessary to close shall be tendered at closing by certified funds. Buyer and seller shall pay the respective closing costs. consistent with local customs. Now, there is a section in here where you can add in closing costs, just so you know. But this is basically saying, short of an agreement between the buyer and seller on who's paying what outside of this, everybody's expected to pay their own stuff, and they do have to bring certified funds to the closing. So, like a cashier's check, things like that. Buyer represents the seller, listing company, things. This is just basically who represents who, and this particular one, what's the MLS. Then we get into earnest money. You've heard me talk about earnest money, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but it does say that you do have to receive the earnest money. In this particular contract, it says 3 days. Keep in mind, I'm not sure why this says 3 days, because it should be 2. State law is 2 days. And then where is it being held? So is it being held at the listing brokerage or the seller brokerage? And then what happens should the contract fall apart? What happens with the earnest money? We've talked about that before, so I'm going to skip past that, but you can read through here. There's 4 basic ways that the money comes out inside of there. Next section is all about appraisals. So most of the time, if you have a lender involved, or every time you have a lender involved, you're going to check box A. That's just saying that a lender is going to get the appraisal or has the option to get an appraisal. The buyer, if the lender allows, the buyer is allowed to waive the appraisal. B is if it's a cash, private financing, or a contract to deed, and they're getting an appraisal, how many days do they have to complete that? And that's what you'll put in here. Or C, if it's a cash deal and they're not going to get an appraisal, you can check C, which waives the appraisal. Then the next line, 92 through 96, is all about what happens if a home does not appraise. So if they select A and B up at the top, and for whatever reason the home does not appraise, then the buyer must, within 5 days of finding out it didn't appraise, either waive the appraisal contingency, saying I'm going to move forward regardless. B, agree with the seller on a new purchase price or payment terms, or C, void the contract. Most of the time, it's going to be a negotiation back and forth, trying to meet in the middle so that everybody's happy in order to find the deal. Keep in mind also, just a side note, that if it does under appraise and the buyer wants to move forward, the seller's not willing to compensate in any way, the buyer would have to bring that much more cash to the table in order to ultimately close. Prorations, this is all about taxes. You all know this, but whoever buys the house is responsible for the taxes from the date of closing through the end of the year. Whoever owned the house up until the point that it sells is responsible for the taxes from January 1 and through the day of closing. And your title companies are going to take care of that and make sure that everybody's compensated accordingly. The tax bill is going to, unless it's like October, November, December timeframe, where tax bills are coming out, the tax bill is always going to go to the new buyer. If the seller gets the tax bill, they'll typically forward it on, because the seller is going to give your buyer a credit for the time they own the home. So just something worth noting and being able to talk through. Section 7 is all about home warranties. If you're getting a home warranty, you basically just fill this section out. It says that the seller agrees, if you check this box, seller agrees to pay X towards a home warranty chosen by buyer or seller. So you do have to designate who gets to check it. Or B, the buyer agrees to purchase a limited home warranty. Or C, the buyer either waives the home warranty now or reserves the option to purchase one at their own discretion and their own expense. So the only time you check this box on line 105 is if the seller is going to pay for the home warranty. There's a new construction home warranty that comes with at least most new constructions. I think every new construction I've ever seen has one, but most new constructions are going to carry a minimum. I think it's actually law that they have to have a 1-year warranty. I could be wrong on that, so don't hold me to it. But if you're buying a new construction, then basically you check this box that says that the warranty has been given, and then what happens, if for whatever reason the warranty is not given within 3 days, basically, and that's obviously allows you to void the contract. Due diligence, this is all about inspections and checking out the property and making sure it is what you think it is. So we have the seller disclosures of property condition here. Obviously, have you received the seller disclosures? You either check A, that you have received them, or B, that you have not received them. And keep in mind that although it's required by law, the seller should provide it. You don't actually have to have it by the time you write an offer. Now, if you, and this one clearly outlines it, which is why I like this contract a little better than, like, say, the Owensboro contract, because in the Owensboro contract, it doesn't mention this at all, and you have to write in contingent upon purchaser receiving and approving seller disclosures within X number of days of accepted contract. So that's the verbiage you would use if you didn't have the seller disclosures. But in here it outlines and says basically the seller has to deliver it within 3 days. If they fail to deliver it within 3 days, then once they deliver it within 3 days, the buyer will have 1 day to review and basically accept it. If they don't accept it, then a release of contract happens at that point. Lead-based paint, if the home was built before 1978, it does need lead-based paint. So if it's built after 78, then you're going to check box A, or you're going to check box B if it's built before 78, which just tells everybody you have to have that. And then they get to choose, do they want to do a lead-based paint risk assessment or not? If they don't want to do one, they waive the right. Not a big fan of waiving rights, by the way. But you're going to check the box if they waive their right under number 1. If they want to do that, or if they just think they might do it, I would go ahead and check box 2. And then they have either 10 days, or you can write in a certain number of days. If there is lead-based paint found, then this next column is how long the seller has to basically respond to the buyer's request. And then, of course, as you all know, if they can't reach an agreement, then the contract is voided, and then at that point, earnest money deposit, as it says right here, would be returned back to the buyer. And I think it's worth noting, I get so many agents that fight this for some reason, like listing agents when we're representing buyers. But if any agreement in regards to the condition of the home, whether it's from seller disclosures not being given in time to lead-based paint to home inspections, if at any point the buyer really does, like, you can't reach an agreement between the buyer and seller, then the money's returned to the buyer. The contract says that. Now, here's the kicker. The seller, if they don't sign a release with earnest money being released, then we have to basically go to option 4 on removing or distributing earnest money, which means it's going to go to the broker, sort of going to court. I guess option 3 or 4. 3 would be go to court, or in this case mediation, or 4 would be go to the broker. Broker's going to send a letter to everybody. Everybody has 30 days to respond. If nobody responds, the broker gets to make a decision on where the earnest money is going to go. So just like to highlight that so that everybody knows what's going on there. In regards to property inspections, so inside of here it talks about how property inspections work. It does mention that property inspection is an above and beyond any type of lender required inspection, whether it be for FHA, VA, things like that. This is hiring a professional home inspector to come in and actually inspect the property. And it does have a part in here where it says that the parties release the agent and broker from liability discovered in the home inspection process. And that at the point that a home inspection is done, the buyer does have the right to ask for repairs, and or in particular to this one, it says that the buyer has the right to walk away without even asking for repairs. So this is important to note, because if you're used to using, say, for example, the Owensboro contract, it doesn't give that option, meaning the buyer can't just walk away. You actually have to ask for repairs, and then if you can't reach an agreement, then the buyer can walk away. This actually says that, if the buyer's not happy during this due diligence period, then the buyer would have the right to walk away. So next is verification of square footage. This just says that you're basically buying the home that you went and looked at, but you do have 15 days for the buyer to verify that the seller has accurate square footage. Within that same time frame, if they find that the square footage is off, the buyer has the right to void the contract and receive their earnest money back, or they may have the option to renegotiate as well. But it's only if it's outside of 10%. So if they say that a house square footage is 1,500 square feet and it comes in at 1,525, that's not a bigger than 10% difference. So that does not give the buyer an out. If it's 1,500 and it comes in at 1,750 square feet, that's more than 10%. So that's where this paragraph would come into play. And then inspections, you can waive inspections here. In most other contracts, you have to write in waiving inspections. But then if you don't waive the inspection, part 2 of that, which starts on line 184, is how many days does the buyer have at the buyer's expense to do the home inspections? And then this goes on, and I'll let y'all read through this a little bit on your own. But once the buyer has had the inspection and also makes the repairs, how many days do they have respond to the buyer's request? If the seller does not respond in that time frame, a seller agrees to all the buyer's repairs. So just something worth noting. As an agent, especially as a buyer's agent, you should be following up with the listing agent, especially as the date to respond gets closer, and make sure they're aware of the deadlines, right? Because everybody makes mistakes and misses deadlines. We don't want that to happen. So if parties do not agree on repairs, then within X number of days of the last response, then the parties can void the contract. If either party provides a notice of intent to void the contract, the other party within X number of days shall either accept the party's repair response or sign a mutual release. So no, and this is why I'm a big fan of like just negotiating, especially inspections, agent to agent, without putting the first. You can put the first one on paper if you want, but then negotiate it back and forth. Like don't send 17 pair repair requests negotiating it out. Instead, have a conversation, reach an agreement, and then put it on paper so then everything's nice and clean. Of course, as always, you have the right to get the property surveyed. If the buyer wants to know the lot size, boundaries, anything along those lines, it is worth noting that that is a buyer cost unless you specifically ask for the seller to pay for this as part of one of the contingencies with the contract. If they are not going to get in a survey, then they would check this box on line 206 and basically say that, or if they are, excuse me, that they're going to get one, they have to check this box on line 206, and then how many days are they going to get, how many days do they have to get the inspection, and then what happens once they get it, meaning especially if the buyer wishes to void the contract within this number of days because they find something that is off. Maybe, for example, they said it was 5 acres, but it's only 4 acres, then that would give them a potential reason to get out of the contract. Next section is all about closing and possession and things like that. You all know this pretty well, but you're basically going to choose a closing date, a actual specific date. Remember, time is of the essence, especially with the state contracts. What that means is if you put a date on here, then it has to happen by that date. There is no real grace period. Short of getting a addendum signed that extends the date, you have to make something happen within this date. And to get the addendum, obviously both parties would have to agree as it says here. And then part B is, and this is what I see a lot of people use recently, is no sooner than X days, no later than X days. So a lot of people are putting in, no sooner than 30 days, no later than 45 days, for example. And that way it can happen anytime in this 2-week period. And we're not so tied to an exact date like what you would do in section A here.
Is that what you would use? Oh, sorry. Is that what you would use for like a contingency? So if you have if your buyer's writing an offer on a house, but they're contingent upon selling their house? Because
Yes.
you have to put a date. You can't just be to be determined, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I would use section B in this case. So,
Okay.
closing not to occur any more than 30 days, not to extend out any longer than 90 days. And it kind of puts an end date on that first right of refusal, so to speak, or that contingency, I should say, not first right of refusal. Good question. All right. Date of possession, it either happens at closing or it happens after closing, and section B is after closing. Condition, this just states that it's up to the seller to maintain the condition of the property. They must maintain the interior, the exterior in the same or better condition at the time of the contract. So if something were to happen, natural disaster, fire, something along those lines, people are moving out and they accidentally knock holes in the wall, this is the paragraph where you would come back to and say, no, it's up to your seller to put the property in the same condition that it was before. I get asked this question a lot. What about cleaning the property? Well, you can see here, and this is the case in every single purchase agreement that I've read recently, that the seller should be free of trash and debris and leave the premises broom clean. They don't have to deep scrub. They don't have to scrub toilets. Probably should. I would. But all they really have to do is sweep it out, make sure that there's not debris, trash, personal products left behind, stuff like that. It does not need to be deep cleaned. If your buyers do want it deep cleaned before they take possession, that's something that needs to be written into an addendum or part of this contract to make sure really clear, because if not, it's just broom clean. Of course, as always, the buyer has the right to do a walkthrough. And actually, you have the right to do 2 walkthroughs. You can do a walkthrough prior to closing, as it says right here. And then if you have a delayed possession, you can do another walkthrough prior to receiving possession in order to verify that the property is in the same condition. This next statement is crucial. It says all terms of this paragraph shall survive closing and delivery of the deed, which means that this survives after closing. And if we do our possession walkthrough and the property isn't in the condition that we expect, then this line allows us to keep this contract to hold the seller accountable. If there's any leases, this section is covered in section 16. If you have lease options, give me a shout, especially if you've never done them before. I'll gladly help you with that and just walk you through what that looks like, because that can be a little bit complicated from time to time. This just talks about warranties, and seller agrees to transfer any warranties that they have at closing. And then, of course, title. The biggest thing with title is a general warranty deed. That's the highest form of home ownership. That means there's no type of encumbrances, anything outside of like utility easements, things that are recorded, stuff like that. That it's the highest form of home ownership. They own the house free and outright. If somebody's buying a maybe like a foreclosure or a bank-owned property or short sale or something along those lines, a lot of times you'll have what's called a special warranty deed. So it's worth noting that that is different than a general warranty deed because of just the way they research it, and that's something we can discuss in the future as well. But it says here, the buyer is advised that title examination alone cannot determine the existence of many possible claims or encumbrances against title. One thing that a lot of people don't recognize is a title search only goes back 30 years. So if you have a property that's more than 30 years old, you can request a further back title search. Usually a title company is going to charge you a little bit more for that. But the best thing you can do is get a owner's title insurance policy. They're really cheap. Not very expensive. You can use Thoroughbred if you want. Give me a shout if you don't understand title insurance, and I'll gladly connect you with one of our title people, or you can use your preferred title company, of course, as well. If the buyer is going to decline, again, I'm not a fan of waiving rights. They can decide not to buy title insurance if they want later on, but as part of the purchase on line 254, if they want to decline it outright and they just don't want it, you can check this box. I don't really see the benefit of doing that. I don't ever check this box. It's more of a, hey, you get to decide at closing or prior to closing if you want that or not, but we're not going to waive it off the beginning because you don't even know enough about the property to make that decision. This has to do with like Jefferson and Bullitt County and stuff like that, so I'm going to skip past it, but basically smoke detectors and what happens here. Condo seller certificate. So if you ever sell a condo, or you have a buyer that's buying a condo, condos in particular, there's something called a condominium seller certificate that has to be given to the buyer and transferred to the buyer. And this is Kentucky law. There's no exception behind that. So this just states that that is part of this closing, where if they're selling a condo, you have to do that. All risk of loss with the seller. Again, this is all about insurance and things like that the seller must provide and maintain insurance through closing, and also that the buyer is strongly advised to secure homeowners insurance prior to closing so that they have coverage the second that they close. Because if not, if you buy a home and let's just say they don't get insurance till the next day and something happens overnight, the buyer is screwed, for lack of better terms. I mean, there's nothing, you got to have that insurance in place at the closing, or else you're opening your buyer up to liability. Additional disclosures, fair housing. Of course, you all know we will not discriminate in any way, whether it's race, color, sex, religion, national status, handicap, family status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So it always will have fair housing and different disclosures for that. And then commission, this just talks about what happens with the commission. You all know now that, all the commission, we've talked about that endlessly. Notices, severability, that just says that this is enforceable contract. This is the part that I want to get to next. So a reason I really like the state contract, and depending on which contract, this is the GLAR contract, but if you use this as a general KREC contract that has this as well, is it allows mediation and arbitration, not just jump straight to going to court. So for example, in the the Owensboro or the Madisonville contracts, they don't have anything about mediation or arbitration, which means if one party's upset with the other, the only true remedy is to take somebody to court. And now we have court costs, we have, you're going to get drug into it, things like that. The reason I like these contracts so much more is it requires a chance for mediation within 365 days, and it says that right here, of the parties raising a claim, which means that either during the contract or after closing, if there's some sort of issue within the first year, then all parties agree to get together and either have mediation, which is where they bring in another party to help negotiate, or arbitration, where they, again, another party that kind of helps negotiate and makes decisions before we go to court. So this is just a layer of avoiding court and trying to get all the parties to work together to do the right thing first. So big fan of mediation instead of going straight to court. Amendments, this just says that if anything needs to be modified or changed, that everybody agrees that the contract cannot be amended amended in any way, email, text message, anything like that, it has to be on paper. It has to be in writing. Keep in mind, no type of verbal agreement would ever stand up in mediation, arbitration, or court. It has to be on paper. If it's not on paper, then it doesn't count. Other provisions, this is where you'd put in your closing costs, this is where you'd put in contingencies, anything along those lines, and you would write all of that in. And if there's any addendums that are attached to the closing, you can check those, whether it's an HOA addendum, delayed possession agreement, escalation clause, so on and so forth. First right of refusal, you could check this box and write that in as an example. And then the final one is the survival clause. This says that this will survive the closing and delivering of the deed, and that if somebody does, basically what that means is somebody doesn't do what they say they're going to do, it's not just till closing. People have to do what they say they're going to do all the way through completion of the transaction. And in this case, completion of the transaction is taking possession after the closing, especially if there's a delayed possession happening. And then, of course, everybody signs it. Or excuse me, the buyers would sign it. Then they're going to send it to the sellers. They're going to accept it or reject it in this box and sign. If they're going to not just flat out accept or reject and they want a counter offer, they're going to jump to line 371. They're going to reject it at this time, this date, and then write in what terms they're willing to accept it. And then that's where the negotiation starts. And y'all know that part of it. And then what's the buyer's response to the counteroffer? Again, once you reach this point and you know that there's counteroffers, I'm usually working that out between me and the agent and the buyer and seller, figuring out where we actually meeting at. And then once we've come to agreement on verbal terms, that's when we put it in writing. Now, the caveat to that, and big fan of CYA, right, and liability, is it doesn't matter if me and JC, if I'm representing the seller and JC's representing the buyer, and we agree verbally. She writes an offer 250. I want 255. We agreed to be at 253, and then all of a sudden I get an offer at 255. Not the right thing to do. Very unethical. I'm just warning you, this can happen. Until all parties have signed at that 253 number, I don't have to move forward with JC. I can technically, although not the right thing to do, I could technically move forward with the other agent that wrote me an offer, because it isn't until everybody signs the final agreement does this actually become an effective contract, and now the seller is committed to this particular buyer, if that makes sense. So that's purchase agreements, state contracts. This happened to be the GLAR version, just because for whatever reason I couldn't get the state contract to pull up, but the state contract is basically a mirror image of that, minus those Jefferson County and Bullitt County smoke detector portions on it. So that's how you do purchase agreements. I know I went over a little bit, but I thought it was worth going through that. So hopefully that helped you. We'll get this recording out, as well as notes on how to fill it out and things like that, and that should be in your email within the next 24 hours. All right. Appreciate y'all hopping on.
Thank you.
Hey, see ya.